The agenda. Okay, great. Yes. So today we've got our last panel, and I'm really excited about this one. I've been excited about all of them, but this one is great. It's two voices that aren't from Texas, but they're still worth listening to. We've got some folks who really know about public involvement, how to implement the technology that's available, and some of the best options to look into talking about methodology. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Graham Stone from Public Input and Joseph Thornley from 76 Engage. I think I just got that wrong. Sorry.
You got it just fine, Kari. Appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Are you able to hear me?
We got you.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having us. And I'm excited to be joined by Joseph, who's honestly got a career that expands far beyond my own in the public involvement space, having been with the ministry up in Canada and having done communications with them for a long time. And my personal experience in being the co-founder of publicinput.com, which is a software platform designed to facilitate all the different types of communication and engagement that public agencies have to support. And so what we're going to do today is offer a hopefully relatively concise presentation, sharing some best practices. Make sure I can pull my screen up here and not share all the other windows. There we go. Are we looking okay there? And wonderful. And so share some best practices around public involvement for efficient, equitable, and representative engagement. A lot of you do this on a daily basis. A lot of you are familiar with the challenges. A lot of you are familiar with the old processes that one day, right, will still be important, but at the moment, right, we're all forced to learn something completely different. So hopefully today can shed a little bit of light on how technology, as Kari mentioned, can play a role in that, and offer you some notes to take back to work with you. Make sure I can advance my slides here. There we go. So like I said, my name is Graham Stone. I act as the Vice President of Government Relations over at publicinput.com, which really just boils down to me getting kind of free rein to pay attention and share a lot of what I see. Our customers span the United States, from Alaska to Florida and everywhere in between. And so that gives me a wide range of experiences to watch, from rural to metropolitan areas, regional planning organizations, metropolitan planning organizations, cities, state governments, and the like. And Joseph Thornley is the president of 76 Engage, and like I mentioned before, has a long career. He'll be talking with you after my particular presentation to cover a little bit more of the tactical side of things. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview first on top concerns for public agencies. Last year, we went and did a nationwide study specifically focused on MPOs, and then a separate one focused on local governments around what concerns they had about their public engagement, community engagement, communication efforts. And then I'm going to share after that a little bit about some of the foundational approaches to public involvement that the International Association of Public Participation, or if that's a mouthful, IAP2, has formatted. That's a sort of a scientific approach. It's an academy of, or it's a group of academics, sorry, that really focus on this practice and provide a lot of valuable education for it that I always try to listen carefully to. And then, like I mentioned, Joseph will share some tactical things regarding public involvement online. One of the more exciting projects that I have been a part of recently is an NCHRP research study. They're all very, exceptionally named. This one is 08122, and it's strategies for future success with relation to metropolitan planning organizations. And so the goal of 08122 is sort of separately to first respond to transformational changes, understanding that the role of an MPO, and of course, I say MPO, but we're all in a very similar role here, so that the phonetics of it are interchangeable. But the second goal is to increase clarity and add relevance as well as value to the services that are offered by MPOs and their similar groups, knowing that there are member jurisdictions and knowing that there are communities who don't have the resources to do a lot of the work that you do. And then, of course, right, adopt to the evolving role that is played. And so far in 08122, we've hosted roundtables at AMPO and other conferences like NACTO, but also separately on our own, and distributed surveys across the country. Some of you may have participated in these before, and I really appreciate that. The more information we can gather, the better. And we've also begun to analyze those things, but in the midst of it all, we had to pivot as COVID-19 obviously threw everybody for a little bit of a loop. And so what we did was we kind of stepped back and said, okay, what were the things pre-COVID and what were the things post-COVID that really rose to the top? And so this is on the screen, what you see is the priorities that really stood out for MPOs in our surveying as some of the biggest challenges. Now, the first was their role in financing projects and using all of their funds effectively. And I think that remains, the biggest challenge for all of us. Everybody can relate to how to finance projects effectively and distribute those funds. But second in that list was collaboration and engagement with the public, stakeholders, and officials. So Katie's presentation yesterday, ours today resonates loudly. And the interesting thing is that after COVID, we've gone out and sort of informally, as we're doing this pivot effort, asked people, and those top two remain. They're still the most important things. Collaboration and engagement with the public. Just add the word virtual right in front of it. So then following that is staff capacity, and of course, right, how many people and technical proficiency. As we, I think was mentioned yesterday, we worry about, the battle for talent, collaboration with regional partners. So in other words, everybody working among one another, among their peer agencies and local jurisdictions. Changing demographics. So, the metropolitization of the country and the rural issues that come from that. And then, of course, changes presented by technology. So as we talk about today, it is continually evolving every day. And to keep up with that is really difficult. And so that's a very interesting project that sheds a lot of light on some of the things that may make you feel a little bit more comfortable with the challenges you're facing. I'll add a note later, but we're continuing to do work in that project and would invite everybody from any of the MPOs on to participate. Like I said, the more data, the better. As a separate initiative, publicinput.com last year hosted a nationwide study of MPOs and as I mentioned, a separate one for local governments. And these are the top findings on concerns more granular that in the practice of public involvement caused a lot of headaches. And overwhelmingly, the top issue was reaching underserved populations. And underserved populations, in sort of the federal speak, right, is environmental justice communities. But what we want to make sure we're doing is also looking at underserved populations as places such as a food desert, right, or places where the typical census data does not give us clear insights. So that requires knowing your community. It requires understanding them, but reaching those underserved populations is a top priority. How do we do it better? The interesting thing is that half said complying with mandated standards. So, your NEPA reports or any other federal mandates when FTA or HWA funding is involved, complying with those standards, self-certification if you're an RPO, and all of those types of things cause stress. And then almost 3/4 said that there is a perceived, anyway, direct correlation between better public participation, so more people in the process, and then of course increased workload, right? So how am I supposed to manage if I ask for comments and I used to get dozens and now I get hundreds, right? How do I manage that? How do I catalog them? How do I go through the workflow? That was pre-COVID-19. Post-COVID-19, we asked, okay, we know that these are some of the concerns. How are you managing these concerns? How are you working with the tools that you have? What methods have you been using to reach and engage the public? And again, as I think the reason that Joseph is going to go into a lot more detail about online engagement is that over 95% said website updates were the primary way that that they reached and engaged the public. We just can't ignore the internet as a wonderful tool, and make sure that we focus on that as a supplement to all the other types of engagement. The other one, though, that was really eye-opening was virtual public meetings. And so that's the shift from having an in-person, at the conference center, at the library, public meeting in order to check that box, and the shift to online so that we could fulfill the requirements of our projects and keep them moving forward. I was having a conversation with a COG here in North Carolina, where we are based, just a couple of weeks ago, and they had said that they did not implement any new technology. They did not shift their public participation plan to allow for virtual. What they did was focus on just getting all the desk work done. For all the projects that were ongoing, they said, well, we're just going to try to we're going to use this time to get as far as we can. But what happened is that obviously as this has continued and we are all still facing these restrictions in public places, they have hit a wall. And now they're saying, well, we have nowhere to go but the public participation process. So we have to find a way. Social media, email, online surveys, and then way behind, but growing, and I make a note of that, is text messaging. And the point here is that there are a wide range of digital tactics available that a lot of people are familiar with and using. And I'd point out that text messaging is really interesting. There's a small startup out of Charleston that we're friends with the founders of, and they're building chatbots with text messages. And they were just selected as one of these. There are these sort of startup accelerators, and those are hard to get into, and you have to have an idea or a tech that people think is really going to go somewhere to do that. And they were accepted into one of these accelerators to really bring that chatbot technology to a bigger audience. So pay attention to text messaging because it is quickly growing as a tool. And that brings me to the virtual and offline aspect of things. We're going to focus on online engagement because of, like you saw, the importance and the relevance and the reach. But we need to make sure we're bridging the tech and the equity divide. One of the interesting things, and we spout statistics from Pew all the time because they're really valuable insights. The interesting thing is that Facebook, regardless of what you think about its use as a communications tool, especially these days, 7 in 10 Americans are still on Facebook, which means an incredible reach. That's regardless of internet access, that's regardless of demographic. It's a total of 70% of all Americans. And it skews higher in those older age brackets as people use it to connect with friends and family. And interesting, as I think many of you probably know, younger Americans are moving away from Facebook. I'm not going to dive into the why. I really don't know, but we follow those and want to make sure we're tracking it. The other thing is that we talk about broadband access a lot, and I know a lot of you are in rural places that struggle with this. I was in actually was at an AMPO presentation in September, and the National League of Cities was doing was giving some insights as to their plans, and they had said that one of their primary priorities for their planning this year and next is the broadband divide, getting broadband out to these rural areas, because it is such a detriment to childhood education, especially when we're remote, communication, and economic development. But outside of the actual use access to broadband is the use of the internet. And so we look at Pew, and they tell us that almost 30% of Americans over 65, regardless of whether they have it, don't use the internet. So that's not an access issue. It's actually a comfort and a tech savvy and a familiarity issue. And so it goes to knowing that your community is going to communicate in a way that is comfortable and preferential to them. We have to know the community, and we have to make sure that we're fitting whatever that particular preference looks like. And then further down, you can say the other thing is, of course, mobile compatibility. If your website, if your outreach efforts, if your communications tactics are not designed mobile first, that should be a priority. There is, among Hispanic Americans, 35%, a 35% group that do not have a computer at home. They only use their cell phones and their mobile data plans as their internet access. And when we see participation in our online engagement tools through public input, we actually see over 60% of those coming from mobile devices. And that's whether it's social mobile apps, whether it's online and mobile websites. All of that is a majority of users. And so those mixed mode approaches is what the term has kind of become to be known, are really important. One of the things we always try to do is back up what we're building, what we're developing as a software company with the data. And so research has shown that when using a variety of different tactics to engage an audience, you actually can reduce surveying error. And I make a side note about statistically valid surveys, because I know that there's a lot of people that still do sort of an annual community survey. It's a big kind of benchmark. And one of the things that we find harder and harder to achieve with the shift to online is that statistically valid survey. This paper in 2005 referenced the decline in participation in telephone surveys. I've personally never actually been called in a telephone survey. Whether that's lucky or not, I don't know. But the point is that there is an inherent bias that these researchers found when using one type of surveying communication channel. And in this case, it was the telephone survey, because only a specific type of person. Now, of course, they can demographically spread those calls out, and they know enough to make sure that the sample size is big enough, but it doesn't account for the inherent bias of the type of people who answer their phones or have a landline that's listed and will give that time to speak to those things. We have to make sure we supplement. Everything we do isn't about a single approach. It's about a wide variety of channels for the public to participate through. And we do that because it also increases participation among rural residents, and again, right, broadband access, but also time. I mean, if you look in the types of jobs even that people have, they are not like myself, strapped to a laptop and a cell phone. They are logistics drivers. They're on the road. They're in the fields. They're working third shifts at the plant. We can't assume, right, that there is a preferential way for them to participate in those more blue collar communities. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, older populations, regardless of access, and of course, I hate to paint stereotypes, but the research shows that there are still a large group of older Americans who just do not have that tech savvy. So we want to make sure we account for that. The big thing to remember is that as we add all the things to do to the list, and we tell everybody, okay, that's not enough, right? This can get a little overwhelming. It goes back to the perception of increased participation and increased workload. And Katie yesterday, actually, in her presentation around the stakeholders, and I'll make sort of a caveat, I voted for the Raptor, but I felt like I was betraying someone, a fellow focus on community engagement. But Kari, the Raptor was cool. Katie pointed out in her stakeholder presentation that there are a variety of low-cost tools. This is not to say that any one platform or any one software can, is needed to achieve these things. Google Forms, MailChimp, texting through the mobile application, that they have. All of those are wonderful ways to collect information across a variety of channels. The primary thing that we need to do in order to make sure that we're not adding to the effort is bring that data to some sort of central database, a repository, a source of truth. Connecting the dots across all those things. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet. If you're good with Excel, you can build in all of those pivot tables that push entries from one sheet to another. If you're not, there are softwares like ours that do that. But there is a wide variety of tools that you can find to store this information and make sure that it's all collecting in a place, so that you can make sure that those are not, if people communicate through social or they communicate through a virtual meeting, those are not falling through the cracks. But outside of a lot of the academic foundations of this, I do think, or the foundations of this, I do think that having an academic approach, and this is something that Joseph is going to elaborate on a little bit more, an academic approach to public involvement is really important. There has been study after study among the folks at IAP2, as well as in the TRB, the studies through NCHRP. There's a lot of focus on this, and I shared this particular slide because I do think that with some flexibility built in, there is no black and white, cut and dry recipe for success. The process is pretty well defined. And so to break it down, the IAP2 spectrum of public participation states that at the beginning of any kind of public participation effort in rural, metropolitan, big groups, small groups, the initial effort has to be around informing the public. So that doesn't necessarily mean just a newspaper advertisement. It doesn't necessarily mean an online, a website with an esri map embedded. What it means is building context. It means having videos that convey the purpose and the need. That's familiar kind of NEPA speak there, but or EISs and EAs. The understanding that the public needs to know not just about the project, but the why and the how. And so that information is really valuable. Then once the public is informed and has an understanding, then you consult. And so the consultant involved parts of this are fairly interconnected, in my opinion, knowing that we want to gather feedback, we want to ask them questions. A lot of times early on, it's open-ended as we're trying to figure out the bigger picture, understanding the people who live in those places and what they need or what they'd like. And then as we consult with them, and that becomes a conversation, right, as then you move into involve. So working directly with them to ensure that they know that you hear them and that you're responding to their needs. It's a trust thing at that point. Once you've built that trust and you've understood the public and you've gathered their feedback, you can then go and start to collaborate. So bringing those, I'll think in a transportation project sense, those those corridor alternatives. But of course, there's a million different applications. Bringing those back to the public and saying, okay, here's what we've come up with. Here's the options. Here are the constraints, whether they be fiscal or environmental or calendar based. And then once you do that, right, you can ask the public and say, look, here's the parameters, and that's how you empower. And that's really, we talk about the trust level. It's hard to measure trust, and we know that it's greater at the local level than it is at the federal level. And that's because the implications of a decision are way more visible at the local level. People feel it, people see it. And so you want to make sure that as those regional councils who work with these local governments, you're conveying this back to the public and letting them know that, this is the process. You had a hand in it. I can't, it's important to say, we will implement what you decide, that bottom right corner there, not based in reality, but, from an academic idea, right, with some flexibility. We need to say, you had a very strong role to play in this. This was not us in a room going and being able to, solve your problems. The TRB, I mentioned them earlier, the TRB put out a paper back in June that really hit on something that's important to us at Public Input, and that's data management. So one of the bigger challenges that we see when we're working with our customers is the disconnect between projects, between initiatives that are driven by different consultants, the disconnect over time as people come and go from an organization, institutional knowledge is lost. Building momentum in these public involvement initiatives through data management is really becoming sort of the next big focus. Actually, Kari mentioned yesterday, and I hate to butcher it, mentioned yesterday a really great rule. She said applied in life as well as work, right? And so that if you can do something now, right, that will save you time rather than do it later, by doing it now, you actually save yourself exponential amounts of time in doing it later. And consider I think the best part of this is consider it a gift to yourself, right? This is, in our approach, the gift that you give to yourself and your colleagues and your consultants by creating data, and again, storing it in a place, whatever that might be. If it's a nicely set up spreadsheet, if it's a CRM, if it's the publicinput.com resident database, that idea about creating data and storing it in a central system of record so that it can be utilized later. You can give it to your consultants. You can analyze it for gaps and understand who you are and are not hearing from. You can bridge different projects together by having people who have signed up in the past and said, I'm interested in these types of things, be there for the next one rather than have to go and rediscover them later on. And then, as we'll maybe discuss if we've got time, sharing that data among your peer agencies. The new NEPA directive released in September actually offered specific guidance around how we can shorten the time frame on EAs by sharing data, if it is public involvement data specifically, if it has already been collected to the standard that it needs to be. So in other words, don't do it twice. And this is something that we're kind of at the front end of, but share that data so that you don't have to duplicate it. I, as a resident of the city of Raleigh, North Carolina, I'm affected by Raleigh, Wake County, Campo, NCDOT, and to me, as just public resident, I don't know the difference between those agencies. And so we have to know, right, that if I've already answered questions about bike lanes and transportation in my particular area, I don't know if DOT owns that road. I don't know if the city owns that road. I just know that somebody asked me, and why isn't anything happening? So sharing that information across all the agencies who are responsible together is something that we get really, really excited about. And before I hand it over to Joseph to again elaborate on some tactical approaches for online engagement, I want to kind of recap the whole, 2 sentences, if you remember nothing else. Broad representation, knowing where your underrepresented audiences live, being able to achieve engagement with them. It requires planning and it requires investment. Those are things that mean time and energy. Our hope is that if you do them and then you store that information and you manage that data, you do not have to do them again over and over. So every engagement should be a continuation of the one before it, whether it's a consultant doing a corridor study or you doing a long range plan. All of that should sync together and be bridged by that larger communication and relationship that you have with the people who live in your communities. And so I invite you, if you've got any questions after this, of course, if you want to learn more about us, shoot me an email. We're always excited to talk. And like I said, my role affords me a luxury of being able to listen a lot more to learn from personal experiences. So without any further explanation, I will introduce Joseph and let him take it away with some specifics on online engagement.
Okay, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Excellent, and hopefully you can see me as well. Thanks very much, Graham, and hi everybody. I really enjoyed that, Graham. When we were preparing for this session, we had a few discussions, and I really like the overall framework that Graham presented to you, and it really works well. And so now I'm going to focus, as Graham said, on tactical. And hello. Tell me if yes. Okay, the right screen came up. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, so I'm going to be focused more on the online. And the nice thing about having done this with Graham is that everything that he says, I find myself extending into practice on a day-by-day basis. So in this time, obviously what we want to do is we want to extend our reach beyond just that group of people that we can bring together, which in areas with lockdown amounts to virtually no one, involve them in a meaningful way. And I think that the real key element for meaningful involvement in this day and age is trust. So let me talk in my time about, and if I'm looking away, it's because I've got my presentation up on a larger screen, about the 4 best practices that can be implemented and that come out of what Graham was saying. So the first one, and I always put this first because I find when I am putting together an engagement with sector experts, and very often I end up working with sector experts, engineers, planners, designers, and they are expressing things from the perspective of what they know to be true. And one of the key elements is to express things in a way that the public can relate to it, which requires that you put yourself in their mind. And so I always put this first when I'm dealing with experts, with science-based experts or planning-based experts, is that what does meaningful really mean to you and I if we were going on to a new site? And the first thing is, ask them only about the things that are genuinely open to discussion. I did some work with a transit agency in Canada, Metrolinx, a few years back. They had decided they needed a grade separation right in the middle of an established neighborhood. That was not in doubt. They ran a first engagement where they did talk about that, and the community said, we don't want that. And the engineers said, well, you have no choice. Why did they engage? On the other hand, a grade separation raised a lot of the track and gave them the opportunity to reconnect neighborhoods under the raised track, to have parkland, and they could talk to them about the use of the area. So especially with online, where people are going to tell you what they think, because we've seen with a lot of online areas, they don't have the limiters that they have on themselves when they're sitting in a room with a real person. Only ask about the things on which you're genuinely open. Ask in terms in which the public is qualified to respond. They are not engineers, they are not planners, they don't necessarily have the expertise, but they do have the experience and they do have the preferences. So contextual information should always be provided, but with the understanding that you're not trying to turn them into planners or engineers, you're trying to give them enough information that they can relate it to their experience and express a preference. Use language they understand. It's not about grade separations. It's about a bridge in their neighborhood. And that should be pretty straightforward. And then commit to listen and consider. I think online, on these last 3, you have great scope. You don't have to agree, but you can show a clear message that you've listened and you're considering, and then you can report back, not necessarily on what you agreed with, but what you did with the input, and that then provides full transparency. So I think that is really important at all stages, because now I'm going to get very techie with you, but the technology and the way that you go about designing the flow really needs to be grounded in a genuineness, treating people like you would the people across the table from you. Now, when I talk about treating them that way, and Graham was talking a bit earlier about in this period of COVID, the second key thing is that online digital does not have to be something separate. In fact, it's even better if it's integrated with in person. It's an extension. So, and also when Graham was talking about the single source of truth, if integrated with the in person, it also gives you the ability, instead of dealing with handwritten notes on cards or forms that have been filled out and then have to be scanned or re-input, that you can actually gather the information on your digital platform. So, for example, when putting together events, and I'll come back to this later, don't think about going to something like Eventbrite or something separate and putting your data all over the place. If you're building yourself a digital hub, gather the information, do all of the registrations right there. And I'll come back a bit later to being respectful and building trust, so that you give people the signals and they want to give you the info at the time that you ask for it. And think about, especially when we get back out into the real world, using the digital as part of your online experience. This is just something that was done about the early childhood program in Guelph, Ontario. Guelph, Ontario has a large population of Mennonites who tend not to participate in the normal way, but they sent folks out to farmers markets on Saturday mornings with tablets and simply interviewed people in those tablets. They also, in the libraries, put the survey on terminals next to the checkout, and people were able to participate wherever they were. So you can integrate where people are in real world, either at meetings or going about their normal life, and bring it all together into that single source of truth. Now, I have found that since COVID, since the impact of COVID, and Graham was talking earlier about Facebook and how people are online and getting their data. Prior to COVID, we had a situation when we were monitoring sites where about 60% of people were coming in on a desktop, and about 40% were coming in on mobile. That has flipped around in the last 9 months. And now across our engagements across North America, we find about 60 to 70% are coming in on mobile phones. That leads me to hypothesize that one of the things that people do in the office when they're using their boss's computer is that instead of playing solitaire, they maybe go onto sites and they engage off of their desktop computers. Now that many of those same people are at home and may not have access to computers the way they did, they're using their mobile phones much more. That's a hypothesis, but the simple fact is that people are using their mobile phones much more. It's important. I don't think we'll ever go back. So it's important to design for digital first, for digital flow. And when I look at design, very often, and it's natural, and let's not fight it, in our organizations, people prepare Word documents, and there's all of the comments in the sides of the Word documents, and people start to then, when they think about going online, immediately they start to think about their corporate site or about a marketing site, and they want to do wireframes. Think instead about how people interact with the information and the input opportunities, and design an architecture. Don't worry about the wireframes, that will come later, but get the information architecture right. So as you'll see on the left-hand side, those 3 gray bars, What does everybody do when they're coming into an online site? The first thing they say, or they do, because they're coming from Facebook or they're coming from Twitter or some other place, and you're just part of their scroll. The first thing they'll ask themselves is, what is this? Answer that quickly. It's not necessary to provide everything about your organization, your board of directors and your executive team and all that kind of stuff, because they don't care, actually. They just want to know, what is this? It's a place where we're going to be talking about something that's important to you. Then they immediately, if they care about the topic, they'll immediately go to the selection in their mind, which is, why should I care? What's in it for me? And that's the second row of things where you present really quickly. And I think this should be right on the home page. The topics on which you are asking for, or the issues on which you're asking for input, so they can get directly there. And then they will select the thing that they want to actually provide you with input on. So that's a basic flow. And I'm going to come back to that with an example of that in a second. Secondly, designing native, mobile first, a seamless flow from social. So right here, I've got what a site that is actually Project Connect, Cap Metro in Austin. And this is how their original engagement, I think it was 2.5 years ago. This is the first thing that people saw. The planners knew on the left-hand side that they were going to be doing a consultation with a number of corridors. However, for the public, especially those people who were in areas that had not yet been touched by Cap Metro, because they were outside of the usual catchment area or outside of a line, they thought of themselves as being in a place. So people could toggle back and forth and they could get to a map, and it was something that was really lightweight on their mobile phones. They could see everything at once, and they could get at what they really wanted and really needed. If they clicked on a place on the map, any place on the map, up would come the opportunity for input, and they would immediately start to get the opportunity for them to provide input. So therefore, Cap Metro right out of the gate was able to achieve greater reach, because anybody on a mobile phone could come here, anybody could navigate quickly, and they got people to give information that was geographically driven by the thing that they actually cared about. And of course, and it worked on their phone first. And of course, if you were on your desktop, you'd see a much different layout of the two things. But if you design for mobile first, it's easy to do the desktop layout. And I say that, remember, we're here watching this on our desktops probably. I'm presenting on a desktop. We all look at this kind of layout, and this is the way that we work, but it's not the way that people interact. Next, when designing native to digital, remember that, as Graham said, people are coming from Facebook. They're coming from social media. They're living in social media. And what's the key about social media? It's that it's choice-driven. It's not linear. And I know that in our corporate sites, we want to present the information that we think that people want to know. In the case of this kind of thing, what we want to do is we want to present the information that people want when they need it. So we need to take a page out of the benign side of Facebook, not the algorithm that keeps you there forever to serve the advertisers, but that which understands that if you're engaged in something, you'll spend more time with it, you'll stay with it, you'll explore it more. And so we can design and should design those things in. And I'll just say, when Graham was talking about building momentum through data management, the key is you have the opportunity to build a database, to use the same kind of behavioral economics, the behavioral science that Facebook or Twitter would build, or any other app would build into their process, but you can do it for the purpose of public good, not serving the advertisers. There's nothing wrong with the mechanisms they use. It's just we've become a little jaded about and suspect about the purpose to which they put it. So you can make it work for you. What does that mean on a practical basis? It means that for the 3 clients that I signed up most recently, every one of whom gave me a linear survey that had been put into effect by a survey agency, where, of course, people were being compensated to complete. There was somebody guiding them through, whether it was telephone or otherwise. The discussion becomes one about, okay, in the survey, that was a way of thinking that makes sense in that medium. In online, where people are coming from an environment where they're clicking in from something where they're making choices, they expect to keep on making choices with you. Don't force them into the sausage wrapping of your way of thinking. So break it up into a modality where they have control over that. And then they will stay longer. And you might feel that no, you need to get them all the way through the survey because you want complete results. And I can tell you from experience, if you break it up into topics, yes, someone may not answer all of the questions, but what they don't answer is the stuff they would have given you a bad answer to anyways, because they didn't care about it. Plus, if you give people the opportunity to pick what they want to go to first, they will keep going because it's that positive reinforcement. So when designing something, and I'd suggest, you think about it as a participant choice interaction flow design, not just an architecture for the site, but you're designing a flow. And let's say you had a site with a town hall and an online survey. Remember I talked earlier about those 3 steps I go through? What is this? Why should I care? And now let me give you my input. Well, if you were designing, the first thing you do is answer the bare minimum at the top on your homepage. What is this and what can you expect? That's all you have to do. You don't need to put everything else on the homepage. A lot of people coming out of traditional backgrounds will say, but we have to put it all on the homepage. No, you don't. As the person who is designing the engagement, you know where you're going at the end, so you can start to present the information that is directly relevant to that at the beginning. And of course, you can always put a resources page over on the side, and you can put as much as you want there, and you can always go there during the journey. Then, in the case of something where we're dealing with, let's say, a virtual town hall and a survey, I would put that on the site, and I'll show you an example of how this turns into a real life experience for the user in a second. And I'd also provide for a report back so that people see at the top what it is, and they get to see the why they should care, which is the green, and that'll be on the home page. Not a lot, but it'll be enough to draw them in, and then they can start to provide their input. Now, I've broken this up into a lot of different things because obviously if you're doing a virtual town hall, you're going to have the RSVP, you're going to offer people the opportunity to submit questions, and ideally you'll give them, if they're already in this place, a chance to come back and see the video live stream later. And as Graham was saying earlier, some of the best people, some of the people who really succeed also add in telephone lines and things of that sort. Again, if you have the resources to be multimodal, for sure, you can increase your reach. You'll see the bottom line, which is issue 1 context questions, issue 1 to 5. That's a linear survey. But instead of forcing people to go from 1 to 5 in that order, you can present the issues, the content, so that they can choose what they want to go to first. And then the final piece is a stay in touch. And now that you've done this, go on to the next piece. That is designing an architecture, much as if I was designing a social media app where I'm designing a flow where people will come in, I will give them what they want, and then they'll stay with me for a while. So let me show you an example of how that actually works. This is the independent electricity system in Ontario. These are the folks who run the grid in Ontario. They want to engage with people across the province. And I think Ontario is about Texas size. So you're dealing with a really really big area. And people who live in Toronto are going to have a different take and a different set of issues than people who are living up in Northern Ontario, which is sparsely populated. So they organize their site at the beginning, where at the top you see, what is this? This is about a chance for you to talk to us about the future of the grid. And they put a video, again, to give people a chance to get into it. And then right away, right on their homepage, they indicate to people, here's the stuff. In terms of if you're from GTA, the Toronto area, or Eastern Ontario, you get right away to go to the stuff that you think will be relevant to you. And again, proximity, what's in my neighborhood, is a good hook. And when I was talking about designing for mobile first, if you look at the way that it works on a responsive phone, this would be my iPhone 8, you see that you've got the locator at the top, a little bit of content, so they're not scrolling through it. And then right away, as if they were on their social streams, they get the opportunity to engage. And if I was on a live site, I'd be able to scroll down, and it scrolls just like your Instagram feed. Let's say that somebody's from the GTA. So I select the GTA. Immediately, as soon as I've selected the GTA, I come to a page. Again, the map's there. I know I'm in the right place. And there I have 3 input opportunities: a quick poll, and a survey, and the chance to participate in a discussion on a forum. Again, I can pick what I want really quickly, or I can register for an upcoming event. And again, you can see how the cards, if they've clicked through the first time, their expectation is they'll just click through the second time. And if I went to the survey, there I would have the opportunity to read the bare bones information, because it's not about a test on their reading skills, and right away go to their input. I won't go to that part right away, but you can see how presenting the information, taking advantage of the fact that we've designed for mobile first, that we've designed to integrate with social media, it leads you to an experience where everything is bite size. Nothing feels like we're reading a long PDF, a download of boards. We break up the boards, we break up the experience through purposeful decisions. So the fourth thing I want to talk to you about is build a relationship of trust. So I've gone through this, and we all know that Facebook is losing our trust. Facebook is under attack, because what Facebook has done is it's made us all suspect it, from regardless of where we come from. Are they editing content to advantage one side or another? Are they giving away my content to advantage advertisers? Can I trust them? Trust is really important. So you're in a world where people are going to come to you online. They're going to want to engage with you. And the key thing, in addition to, I started it with offering them meaningful input, build a relationship of trust over time. And I know that there are many people who come to me when I'm designing things, and they say, either I want people to be anonymous, or I want to get their ID, and I want to get their ID at the front end. I actually think you should stay away from anonymity if you possibly can, simply because you lose the opportunity to enter into a relationship with people. And when I look at it, from my perspective in engagement, I think that in this society, we have all become anonymous cogs, with inequity, with people with wealth being able to buy their way to the top of the line, with media in California and the US talking about the flyover states, or if you're a Canadian like I am, knowing that, very few people actually study Canada in school in the States. So we're something relatively exotic. We're like you, but not really like you. We're not really known. And what people want is the opportunity to be known, and you have the opportunity to know them and to start to deal with them as individuals, and to take their individual experiences and their profiles into account, and that means building up a profile over time. So by building a relationship, by taking the approach that this is not going to be a one-off, that you are going to create a place and you're going to say to people, let's talk about this. First of all, we know it's online. There's no print runs. One of the things I was doing is I added 4 slides as Graham was speaking this morning, because digital lets you do that. And I thought they would be really apt for what he was saying. Similarly, when you're doing engagement online, you can look at your first, what you put out first, and you can say, let's do a second iteration. Let's go out again. So be discoverable and persistent. Offer security and privacy. Give them the privacy promise and then honor it. You are not Facebook. You own your data. Never, ever, ever run a poll on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that, because we all know where that data, that the metadata is going. Your deal with the public is to say, you're on our space, we're doing an engagement with you, we will honor our deal with you, and you can do it with them. And then the final thing is, and this goes back to the issue of asking people to register up front. The ideal state is that people will give you their information, but you don't want to drive away those people who may not yet have full trust in you. So I find that if you want a best practice and something that I've seen work repeatedly, going back to IESO, this is their event page. They offer people the opportunity to register. They ask people for information, and if people give them that information, they can collect it against a profile so that they can invite people out for future engagements and ask them for more info. But something they also do is they also practice what I call deferred registration optional. And I know, like, just so I can always remember, it's only three words, but basically whenever they ask people and in a survey, ask them to give them some identifying info, they will put a pop-up that says, thanks for that. Why don't you actually register, and we will send you information on future developments, future input opportunities. And the optional part is they always offer a no thanks, not right now option, so that people can bounce away. They get the best of all worlds. Over time, they build up a relationship with people who will become known. They gather the extra information for the participant database so that you are developing a single source of truth, and you can develop your momentum by managing the data in one place. Goodbye to Excel spreadsheets. Goodbye to having to import, move data around. You've got one place, and people will give you the information. Not everybody, but if you respect them, you will have built their trust. And what we see, especially in engagements where if they follow what I've suggested is the best practice, not a linear survey, but where you break it up into topics, is that we get a lot of people who may say the first time, no thanks, but then they'll fill out another questionnaire and they'll give you their personal info and register the second time, because the second time around, the second topic, they realize, oh, you're for real. You really do care about us. And this is a meaningful engagement opportunity. And through this, I hope these 4 things are helpful and help you to think about how to implement some of the by way of tactics, some of the things that Graham was talking about earlier.
Great. Thank you, Graham and Joseph. That was really interesting and really engaging. I really appreciate that. Yesterday we broke into we broke into breakout rooms. Today I thought we would try something different given the nature of this content and have us go straight into the Q&A. Josh Rivakov is going to be monitoring the chat, so if y'all can enter your questions in there. And in fact, I just saw a question come up, if it would be able to get a copy of this presentation. So Graham, Joseph, do you mind if I post this to our forum?
Yep, for sure.
Excellent. Absolutely. Okay. So there you go. I'll be able to post it to the forum. And as I mentioned, when I get these things posted up there, I'll be sending out a notice to everyone to have a look at it. So as y'all are getting your questions in there, I had a couple of starter questions, things that kind of came to mind as I was hearing you. One thing I know, about half of our agencies are going to be using consultants for their process. So how would this tie in if somebody is using a consultant for their public involvement?
I think that I'm surprised it's only half. You know, the value of having consultants at your disposal is, you know, the bandwidth that they have to build those relationships and live in the communities and focus right on a specific practice. And we see, actually, consultants are such an important part of the process for us that we have an entire sort of wing of the company dedicated to just supporting the training and onboarding for consultants who are doing work on behalf of an agency who holds a license with us. So that, we call it our partners program, but that is directly related to the importance of consultants and making sure that they have an understanding. One of the big challenges, and I'll just kind of offer this, and Joseph, please jump in, is the consulting firms, many of the larger consulting firms, and I don't think there are any on this call, so you know, I can speak freely, but many of the larger ones are building their own. You know, I used to be in consulting. I worked for a regional planning consulting firm, and there's always you know, that effort to get a little bit more margin and provide a little bit more value. And in that light, a lot of firms, the bigger ones, are building out their own tools. One I know specifically is sort of like a comment aggregator, right? So for the formal comment periods, you know, a place that they can do this, and they tout that in their proposals as one of the values you'll get. And then another, actually, I'll point out several have their own sort of like digital foyers, 3D rooms, if you've seen those, where there's like a VR kind of, you click on the website link, and instead of a traditional, like Joseph was showing you, page, you get a 3D room. I actually just wrote a white paper on those, so you know, I won't dive into it, but that is fine, right? If you've got the resources to pay a consultant to make a fancy 3D website, and remember, it's as a portion, right? It's not the whole thing. Do it, yeah, but make sure that they are basing their data management, they're basing the place where all this lives and is stored. Joseph said, you own the data. Google should never own your data. Facebook should never. Use a tool built for this, where it's your data stored in a place. And lastly, make sure that they are not over reliant on the tools, their fancy website. This is, you know, we've got to know that they're going out to the community, like Joseph was saying, with kiosks and paper surveys to supplement that. There's oftentimes a focus on the flashy selling things that a consultant has, but make sure that it's a part of a bigger picture. Joseph, hopefully, you know, doesn't counter what your opinion is of consultants, but feel free.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I work with a lot of consultants because I'm coming from it from the online platform where we're all over North America, and I know that agencies want to deal first and foremost with people who are grounded in their community. It can help them deal with nuance and have facilitation skills. One of the things that I find when I'm working with consultants is that, and Graham showed you the IEP2 spectrum. I'm not sure how many people are members of the IEP2, but I am, and I participate actively. And IEP2, even after all these years, is very much grounded in the face-to-face meeting facilitator. And they do most of their training that way. And that's where I find most of the industry is. So there's a complementarity I find between the traditional skill sets that the consulting organizations offer, which may be subject matter expertise and facilitation. And if you're designing something online, to look for expertise in online engagement, in behavioral science, in those kinds of things, where people in larger groups coming from outside of a controlled environment will actually be interacting with you. So yeah, I think now the other thing is on consulting, There is no doubt there's no doubt that consultants will have a point of view, and very often you'll end up with a consulting team. And I know that I will feel myself subject to the push and pull as people are asking for this and that, and you end up with a whole bunch of stuff. And it's a bit like serving dessert before the meal at certain stages. I think the real key that I've seen when dealing with online is that it's important for the ultimate client to actually always be there at all times and reminding people what the result is that you want to achieve. Because what I've talked about is nothing but methodology. You don't have to learn to use any of these platforms any more than you need to learn to facilitate your own meeting. But you need to own what it's all serving. And that's my only hesitation about consultants, because as Graham was saying, everybody's got an expertise, and that expertise should never drive the process.
And it looks like, as we were talking, Joseph, there was a couple of thoughts on the chat that came in, and I think that they're exactly along the same lines. Colin mentioned he knows of several agencies that are slightly mistrustful of consultants. And how do you get around this, or or at least a better way to say it? Having been a consultant, one of the things that we know in our business development department is that there has to be a value provided beyond what the other consultant can do. So we always asked ourselves, what can we do that is not, the scope of work regurgitated and pasted back onto the paper itself, right? So force those consultants, they're all competing for your work. They need your work in order to survive. And so force them to bring you something that the others won't. Those things can be relationships with leaders in the community who you need to work harder to reach, a social capital, so if you will. It can be a system of record. If they're familiar in Joseph's platform or public input, the ability to make that a faster and easier process for you. I'm actually from Canada originally, so I've lost the process, but I noticed that, Joseph. But I think that you need to recognize that these consultants have an expertise, will do what you would like, and want to bring you new ideas. So lean on them and say, what do you got that's different? And I think that will show the light on which of your consultants really care and are trying, and which of them are just responding to RFPs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just because while you were speaking, I had a chance to look at the questions as well. And I think I may have inadvertently, and Andrew asked a question about, in the first presentation, we heard about the value of sharing information with other agencies. And in the second, we heard about the importance of maintaining privacy. And I actually, Andrew, I'm in total agreement with Graham about sharing. And in fact, so for example, we work for the Government of Ontario. It's a Canadian province. And they use the platform across all of their departments. We work also with the Government of Canada, and they cannot share their data across all departments. And I see from working with one big organization that can get insights out of how people feel about auto transportation versus in another department, mass transit, because they're actually separate. And then I look at the feds who can't do that. So I am like, I think, and again, this is where the single source of truth and data management, if you can have that kind of a relationship where you say to people, we're here for the long term, we're going to be dealing with you on this basis. And then within your own organization, you say to people, we want to have a central place where we'll collect the data, we'll give people a promise, you can share across things. My concern about sharing is just not to recognize that, organizations that are paid for by advertising serve the interests of the advertisers. And really quickly, if I can answer another quick question that was asked, which was whether or not it makes sense to go out and hire social media experts. And that probably came out of what I was saying. Yes and no. And again, as someone who has an online engagement platform and came out of marketing, I have had clients who say online engagement, that's all about me presenting the information and having a whole lot of people agree with me. And success is that we're going to show the CEO at the end of time that at the end of the engagement that we've reached this number of people and we've got this amount of agreement. And that is the traditional marketing perspective and the marketing definition of engagement. And very often social media experts come out of agencies or backgrounds where their whole role has been to promote, to promulgate the info and promote agreement. Then there's the other side, and that's the people who've come up more recently, and usually they find themselves in the IAP2 or the Planning Association or people of that sort. And their definition of engagement is more, I think, what Graham and I have been talking about today, which is much more about let's find out how people feel and let's validate the ideas based upon people likely supporting and going along rather than persuasion. So I think, again, yeah, social media, it's important to understand how people, what they expect, but it's also important, just like in the early days when everybody thought, well, social media, I need to go and get a social media guru. And you had all kinds of organizations that were, where senior executives were saying, reverse mentor me to the 23-year-old. You also don't want to put yourself in a position where you get a person whose understanding of how to use these levers of online engagement for a different purpose. I hope that's helpful.
I'm going to just go back to the data sharing real quick, Kari, because I actually pulled up a slide from that presentation I was making on the NCHRP project. And so if you can see this, just this one slide, the important thing to remember in this is that each of these agencies shares a funding, we'll call it a vertical, but there are pass-throughs, right? So the DOT allocates money, goes to Campo, goes to Raleigh, especially in the TIP process, going into the STIP process. But also, any of the other more specific corridors or whatever. The city of Raleigh, right, may have performed public involvement to the degree that would qualify for the state level planning or for FHWA, and so they can use that, right, and reference it. This is when it is coordinated across agencies that overlap like this. This is allowed for in the new NEPA and encouraged. And I would just say that the primary thing you have to make sure is that these people have opted in. There is nothing that you can share if if the people who are participating, right, have asked to be anonymous. Right? That's just aggregated, big picture, big data. But there is precedent and even encouragement to make more of that information. Of course, it requires management of the data. But that is the specific aspect is to make sure that these people have said, I'm interested and I'm signing up. And we use pop-ups, Joseph, your site probably has something similar where it says, would you like to receive updates, and, this agency or any of its peers, can contact you. And we make it very clear, but it's got to be a yes, I'd like that.
I want to hop in with 2 questions to make sure that we cover them, things that had come up yesterday, talking about accessibility, both in terms of ADA concepts and also languages. If you each could talk about how your platforms address those or other options for addressing those.
You can go ahead, Joseph. I've been taking them first for a little bit.
Sure. So accessibility, whoops, better make sure I've got my mic on. Accessibility is the thing we all care about, but so many people overlook. And indeed, I find with online that there's a tension between people who say, but I want to make it really fun and I want to introduce things. And the ADA and in fact for the web, what you're really governed by is the Web Consortium Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2 AA. Which means the absolutely essential and the you really should have this. And then there's another bunch of nice to have. That would be AAA. Most people do it the WCAG 2 AA. So if you're at any stage doing it, that's the standard that will keep you out of trouble with the ADA. And you don't need to have the lawyers looking at it every time. You can run, there's a Chrome app, the Wave, a Chrome extension, the Wave extension. You just put it in, you can run it on your site, and it will tell you what you're actually not doing. Now, really, really important. There are about 5% of people who rely on screen readers. And that's the technology first and foremost that you want to deal with. And you'd be surprised at how many things are in regular websites that are not ADA compliant, because in the rush to get something really good, people who are totally enabled have said, let's do it this way, and that looks beautiful. And nobody has actually ever come back and said, we'd love to do that, but there's a problem. Or people have said, we can solve the problem and it will cost you money. And somebody said, not right now. So I think that ADA is one of the big vulnerabilities that a lot of organizations have right now when we start with new ones and we run tests on their existing sites just to get a sense of where they are, because we're going to integrate. So really important. Don't overlook it. It can come back to bite you, but don't feel guilty, because the very fact that you make it a priority puts you ahead of about 95% or 9 out of 10 people who haven't quite gotten there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We had actually a very interesting learning experience as a platform, right? Building is what we do, and so our accessibility met, right, the Wave, and it's a very, very great, it's a good best practice to go and add that plugin. It is a site, there's a site that you can go, the Wave, and I truthfully forget what it stands for, but it will audit your site for you. We met all of those things, but King County, Washington, where Seattle is, proved to be one of those opportunities for us to learn from a place doing it just astronomically better. So listening to them and going that much deeper into having pop-outs that explain what a term might mean, and having that be, screen reader accessible, and making sure that every single one of your pictures, there's no text embedded in your pictures. It's got to be a picture, and then if there is text, the caption within your site builder has to state what the text in the picture said. So there are, a lot of things that are basic, but then you even when you do it as much as we do, you find people that are doing it better, and you can learn. So don't feel like this isn't a consistent learning curve. Yeah, the WCAG and the Section 508 compliance is important. You mentioned translation too, though, Kari, and that's another one. A lot of so Google Translate provides, as I think many of you are familiar with, about 70, 80%, right? It's pretty good, and it'll get you by in a pinch. But a lot of the languages we've learned, actually King County I'll reference back to, because there are so many different people of so many different backgrounds that live there, they came back and they said, yeah, this is fine, except that in Vietnamese, for example, bolded and different types of fonts mean different things. And I have no idea, right? I've never been to Vietnam or tried to learn the language. And so that means that you have to provide a way for people to go beyond, right, that Google Translate. We build in a tool for this. This is not a sales pitch, though. So what I will tell you is hire a freelance translator who knows those languages to ensure that your sites are offered in those languages, but make sure that those are copied sites. Too many times, if you're doing this manually, I've seen communities make an English survey and then go from scratch and build a Spanish, or in Canada, right, a French survey, and the questions are ordered differently. Same questions, different order. And that is a nightmare when it comes time, right, to aggregate and analyze. So if you're going to do it manually and you're not employing a software, make sure that you put everything the same and then translate it, so that when you bring it back, right, it's not going to be, oh God, because this was a bit early, like last year, we'd spent weeks trying to help a particular customer bring everything back who had done it differently. So just a heads up, right?
Graham, I think you're so right about that when you say, do it first, finalize it in one language, and then translate. I've seen organizations that want to develop them both at the same time, and they ultimately end up taking more time, because just like if we were preparing a marketing document or a technical guide, it's important not to have a team constantly saying, oh, go and change this in that language because we've changed it in this language. I agree with you with Google Translate. We have not run into the problem yet that somebody has had a problem with the Google Translate. It usually has been good enough. Areas where it is put into effect are places like Toronto or Austin has it on Cap Metro, or Arlington, Virginia. Larger places with cosmopolitan populations that want to extend their reach. But the other side is, and again, as you were saying, we find that there are sites that are either English and Spanish or English and French across North America, because those are the language combinations. There's no right solution everywhere. It has to be the solution that works with your population. Just to give you the simple fact is, in Canada, federal organizations are compelled to be fully bilingual, and we know that their development cycle is a whole lot longer. Provinces should be bilingual, but aren't necessarily. And we find that for those kinds of organizations, pretty quickly, if they start out and say, we're going to be fully bilingual, that in the rush of deadlines, and they've got to do an environmental assessment, they've got timelines, they've got lawyers, that the second language may end up not being supported on a lot of places. So I mentioned Arlington, because in Arlington, Virginia, what they decided to do was go with an English only platform and then build Spanish or other languages. They have one there that is, a third language out of Africa, because they have a large population within the city, and they put it right there on their English site. So they haven't built up the expectation that everything will be bilingual, but they've gotten real praise from the populations who find that they may be a minority, but they have been acknowledged by finding it on that site. Final thing, if you are online, you're going to for sure have a spam filter. And there are words that in an English vocabulary come out in the spam filter. So as Graham was saying, you got to watch it really closely. Whether you get a consultant or whether you've got somebody on your team, you got to check the language rather than just assume because it came out of your Word document that it's still okay when it's online.
It's a really good point. Moving across languages, how there are some definite challenges. And I wanted to acknowledge a question that came up in the chat that I think is worthy of its entire own session. Andrew asked, how would you advise organizations to plan out the scope of the input that's being solicited? Talking about what's actually open for discussion or input and how willing the agency is to make changes based on the feedback. And I've responded that at some point we're going to have an entire session on that, because that's a big conversation. I'd like to have it be more of a conversation with the different agencies involved to see what's possible as they're going through their plans. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew I wasn't ignoring Andrew.
And I agree, that's a big question. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of the things. But when I look at it out of the gate, the scope of input that's specifically being solicited, and the planning for that, the first thing that my head goes to is not necessarily what do we want to hear, what kind of content. It's who do we need to include. And so the scoping aspect should start with a map of the project area or your region and an understanding of the communities and each of their differences within it. And then as you're scoping that out, building tactics to reach them. And that the North Carolina Department of Transportation keeps a list, and they call it like the bird list, and it's an acronym for something not as cool as a hawk or a falcon, but it's the community leaders that they have relationships with, who they know can be a megaphone or a bullhorn for their efforts. And they have that mapped out so that they look to the project and they say, okay, we need to call these people first and bring them in on this and give them the tools to provide to their community for several reasons. One, the trust. Two, maybe a language barrier. Three, the preferred form of communication. And that is one of the early things that is the hardest to do, defining the audiences and how you're going to reach them. Then, yeah, I think that maybe more to what Andrew's saying, what is actually open for discussion and input, and how willing are you to make changes to the plan? That there are so many nuances. I looked at transportation things where we have fiscal constraints and we have endangered species, studies, and we've got traffic studies and all these things that are science, right? You're not going to, regardless of the public input or the public's input, that you're not going to be able to move through a wetland unless you can wrangle some sort of CE. I would say that is the public participation plan has to be designed to be flexible. Is probably how I'll leave it. You never know, right, what the parameters are going to be, and you have to be open. But Joseph, take it from here and elaborate if you've got additional thoughts, obviously.
Well, I like your approach by understanding the audiences, putting it in the bigger context, and having the plan. And then when when I look at it, it comes directly into what I was saying earlier about if you are defining the issue where the public will find you online, avoid the trap of wanting to cover all topics, because the more you talk about, the more that people expect you're going to address that. Right now, I'm working with Natural Resources Canada and the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Both of them are using the platform, two separate instances, because we're having a discussion about what do you do with the radioactive waste that has been stored on site since the Bruce Power Plant went up in 1956. And we still have it sitting there, and we haven't dealt with it. This is a tough topic. What both of them have done, if you were to go to their home pages, is that you would find they are the briefest things, because they have very carefully defined exactly what the consultation is on and not raised any other topics. They've got an FAQ where people can say, well, how about this or how about that? At which point they then say, that has been dealt with here or there, or, not now, or where it will come up. But that's where being really to the point and shaping people's expectations with the first paragraph they read when they find you online is incredibly important.
That shaping expectations, I want to talk about that. It's something that I would cover in the 5310 public involvement, because there we are coming in as TxDOT, taking the input from the transportation providers and the riders themselves, but we were not in a position to say, okay, we'll fix this. So we need to make it very clear that we're taking in the input, we're going to take it under consideration. It may factor to a certain percent in something, but that this isn't a promise that we can fix it. But that we are respecting your input, just kind of making sure that boundary is clear. Great. Well, we've actually hit our time limit for this. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Graham. I think this was a good conversation. We got some great questions. We've got I know that y'all shared your contact information. I'll make sure that that's in the forum as well for folks who can get to you. And I probably should have led with this, but these kinds of public engagement platforms would be eligible for funding under the continuation funding for the 5-year plans, as well as for the coordinated call planning projects. So you can talk to these gentlemen, and there are several other companies as well who do this, about what it actually looks like to implement something like this. So
Thanks, I appreciate it.
yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, it's time for a break. So everyone, we'll do a 10 minutes. We've got some stuff to wrap up. There's an important couple of minutes about an intercity bus study that's coming out that is going to potentially impact everybody. So let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back, and then we can wrap up and everyone can go and maybe have an early weekend. I don't know, but 10 minutes. We'll be right back.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you all. Bye.